All right. Well, hopefully everybody did a good job setting up the different null and alternate hypotheses and stuff like that. So again, if you did have any trouble or you ran into any issues or anything, please let me know so that way we can work these out. Because again, honestly, this is going to be the trickiest part of this section. So if you can get the setup and all that kind of stuff good, the actual proving the hypothesis is a piece of cake. So trust me, this is definitely where we want to spend the most time and effort to make sure we do everything correctly. All right, so just like I had mentioned before in the last section, we had said that there were basically two types of ways that you could test a hypothesis or finish a hypothesis. So we could either reject H naught, which means our H1 is true, or we could fail to reject H naught, which means there isn't sufficient evidence to prove that H1 is true. And so those are the ones that are most likely to occur, but it turns out there really are four possible choices for a hypothesis test. And if we end up in the other two, then that means we've screwed the actual survey up or we've screwed it up somehow on our own. So in a perfect world, if we haven't done something wrong, then we should always fall into one of the first two cases. So if something bad happened or if we did something totally wrong, that's where we're going to fall into the trap of these type 1 and type 2 errors. So let's just kind of look through the four choices again. So again, the first one is the one we did the last time. If H naught is true and we fail to reject H naught, then that's perfect. So we've done the right thing. So in this case, H0 was actually true. We failed to reject it. So we haven't done anything wrong. Everything's perfectly fine here. Similarly, if H naught is false and we reject H naught, then that means H1 is true. So again, this is perfect. We've done the right thing. Nothing wrong. So these are where these type 1 and type 2 errors come in. So if H0 is true, H naught is true, but we reject it, so that means we've officially screwed up. And so this mistake's called a type 1 error. So the idea is H naught is true, but we should have failed to reject it. But instead we reject H naught and we say our alternate claim is true. So in my example that I did before, the 90% of people that love math, so it might not be true, but but I don't believe it. So I reject H naught. And so I say that for certain, 90% of people love math and stuff like that. So that would be an example of someone blatantly kind of making a type 1 error, or maybe not even blatantly, but and then a type 2 error is when H naught is actually false, and then we decide not to reject H naught in this case. So again, we've officially screwed up, and the mistake is called a type 2 error in this case. So what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about these type 1 and type 2 errors and how they relate to real world things, just so you can kind of get an idea of how they're going on. So medical testing is a perfect example where this actually comes up. So let's assume H naught is that you don't have, in this case we might as well call it corona. So let's hope no one has. That would be ideal. We don't want anybody to have corona. So the null hypothesis in this case is that you don't have the disease. You don't have corona disease or the COVID disease or whatever. And so a type 1 error would be, in medical terms, what's called a false positive. And so I kind of ran through, what's going on. So in this case, H naught we know is true because that's what it means to be a type 1 error. It means H naught is true. So in medical lingo, this means that we do not have, COVID disease. But since we rejected H naught, that means that we're actually telling the person that they do have the COVID disease in this case. And so that's what it means to be a false positive. So you're basically told that you have the disease, but you really don't actually have the disease. So I'm going to kind of rate these in, really bad and possibly bad and stuff like that, just to see how these errors can really cause problems and stuff like that. So this one is worrisome, because if you went in and you tested positive for COVID, well, it's definitely unfortunate. You'd probably go home and you'd quarantine, you'd stay away from people from 14 days and stuff like that. And in the end, you wouldn't have gotten anybody sick anyway because you didn't have it. But it was kind of an inconvenience for you. You probably couldn't work the times you were, which could be good or bad depending on whether you like your job or not. So you couldn't go into work, you couldn't go around people and all that stuff. But ultimately, you weren't going to get sick anyway because you technically didn't have it. Where and so this isn't, so it's inconvenient. It's not terrible or anything like that. Where the type 2 error in this case is what's called a false negative. And so in this case, HO is false. So remember, type 2 errors, the null hypothesis is false. And then from there, we decide, so that means that you actually have the disease. So again, putting it in terms of the language that we're working on. And we failed to reject H naught. So this means that we're telling the person that they don't actually have the disease. So now we've got a person that has COVID. We're telling them they don't have COVID. So what do? Oh, well, I can go back to work. So now they've infected everybody at work. They went to the grocery store. They infected everybody at the grocery store. Everybody's getting sick all over the place. They're going to get sick because they don't even know it because they don't even know that they have the disease and all this stuff. So this is pretty terrible. This is kind of the worst case thing that could happen in this case because it's bad for the person. It's bad for everybody else. The first one was inconvenient. And if you thought, I don't believe it, you could have gone back and gotten another test in a couple of days, and it probably wouldn't have been, like, the chances of getting like 2 false positives are pretty slim. But this false negative is going to be devastating. I mean, it's going to make tons and tons of people sick. Nothing good is going to come from this type 2 error, in this case, this false negative. So this is pretty bad in this case. All right, does that make sense? Everybody have okay with that? All right. So let's look at court convictions. And so in this case, the null hypothesis is that you're innocent. And so in this case, technically you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But in this case, we're actually going to assume you didn't do it. Somehow you got arrested for whatever reason, just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you actually didn't do it or whatever. So the type 1 error in this case, so what could happen is we could convict an innocent person. So in this case, since H naught is true, so again, what that means in this terminology, that means that you are innocent. But since we since we rejected H naught, that means we don't believe you're innocent. We found you guilty as a jury, and now you're going to jail for a crime that you didn't commit. So this is pretty much the worst outcome that you can get, especially if it's you that this actually happened to. So this would be kind of equivalent to the type 2 error above. I mean, this would be sort of the worst case scenario in the world, like having to go to jail, serve time for a crime you didn't actually commit. So not good at all. So a type 2 error, and this one's not great either, to be honest, but I mean, it's, I guess, a little bit, not as bad as the one above, but so in this case, it would be the equivalent of letting a guilty person go free. So in this case, remember, type 2 errors, H naught is false, so that means the person actually committed the crime, but, and that's what I said here, so that means you're actually guilty. But since we failed to reject H naught, that means that we're saying that the person is actually innocent, so they get to get released and get to live to commit another crime another day. So, again, kind of inconvenient. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate that somebody went home. Probably, I mean, neither one of these are great. I mean, probably the first one is definitely worse, because getting sent, to jail for something you didn't do is definitely worse than getting set free. Again, depends on how bad the thing was that you did. I mean, ultimately, we'd like neither of these to happen. And the court conviction went below. So they're both kind of bad. I would say the type 1 error is definitely the worst, even though none of them are great. But again, that kind of makes sense about how these errors would relate. All right. So again, just to kind of summarize the type 1 and type 2 errors. So a type 1 error means that we're incorrectly rejecting H naught. And a type 2 error means we're incorrectly, and I can't even spell incorrectly apparently, means we're incorrectly not rejecting H naught in that case. All right, so the last two, what I wanted you to do is kind of the same thing I did above. So in this case, go through, kind of figure out what the error types would be based on these different situations. Suppose Frank tests his rock climbing equipment. H naught is that his equipment is safe. So go through and kind of write down similarly like what I did above, just to give yourselves a chance to think about what a type 1 error would look like, what a type 2 error would look like, and also to talk about in your mind, like, which one would be pretty terrible to have happen and which one would be a little less terrible, I guess, to have happen in this case. So, and again, this is some tricky stuff. So, I mean, we're getting into some pretty advanced statistics here, and it's kind of, fun and interesting. So don't get frustrated if it's a little, if there's a lot of language and stuff like that. If you need to, watch the videos a couple times just to make sure you got the lingo down, you know exactly when to use kind of what thing, and ask questions. I mean, that's the main thing. I mean, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help and stuff. So ask me any questions you might have. I'll be around all day tomorrow, so just let me know. So otherwise, good luck, and I'll see you guys at the team site.